Anaga PN, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, asked this very interesting question. How would our history have changed if the Battle of Plassey didn't happen? It's a what-if question, and it might seem silly to ask in some ways to some people, because they will say, but what's the point of what if when an event or has already taken place? So if you can't change it, why bother asking the question? But I would disagree with you, because I think what ifs are very interesting, because it rewires your mind. It opens up the situation to many possibilities. It also makes you realize, as a student of history, as a researcher of history, as a writer of history, as a historian, or of anything really, an analyst and a presenter and a writer, that that one event is not incumbent on one impulse or one input. So many things are poised. There are so many people involved in a particular development or a outcome of a battle or a leading up to the battle, or the reasons for a particular event or a development, or the way history's come the way it has. So it's very, very important to consider that. So these kind of what-if questions are extremely important to drive debate, drive thinking, and drive outcomes to that kind of consideration. So I would say that, look, Anaga, what could have happened if the Battle of Plassey didn't take place, or if the Battle of Plassey wasn't won by the British East India Company? I mean, we may have been speaking in French. I may have been speaking to you in French. I may have written a book in French, because the French might have won. Who knows? Not the Battle of Plassey itself, but the run-up to the Battle of Plassey, where it had become a contest really between the French and the British East Indies companies. This conversation could have been happening in Marathi, because at that point of time in India, with the Mughal Empire in fracture, the most rampant and forceful political, piece on the chessboard was the Maratha Empire, was the Maratha confederacies. So, and they were rampant. They were in northern India, they were all over western India, central India, parts of southern India. They'd come right up to Murshidabad, on the other bank of the river, the Bhagirathi River from Murshidabad. That's how close that they had come. And so it could well have been that this conversation, I could have been speaking to you in Marathi. It could be that the court language would have remained Persian if the Mughals had somehow, unlikely in this particular case, if the Mughals had sort of won through. And, the Battle of Plassey, to my mind, or a battle, maybe not at Plassey, but some other location, was a battle that was waiting to be fought in one way or the other, because the British and the French sort of rivalry had peaked to a great extent at that particular point of time, commercial and political rivalry. And like in southern India, like in the Carnatic, it had also become a place in Bengal, had also become a sort of a landscape for that rivalry. And it was sort of tailor-made to their interests in a particular way, because there was a conspiracy in the court of Murshidabad. Siraj-ud-Dawla was a very young Nawab. There were many jealousies at court. The people were upset with the way he was doing things. And there were people, nobility in Murshidabad, were conspiring against Siraj even before he'd become Nawab. So, they were, it could well have been that, that there would have been other impulses, and the battle could have really gone either way. Clive, for instance, wasn't sure till way into the battle that they would win. Mir Jafar wasn't sure that his so-called conspiracy to go against his boss, if you will, his Nawab Siraj-ud-Dawla, would play out in spades and make him the next Nawab of Bengal. He wasn't sure of that as well. He was watching which way the battle would go till much of the battle. So these are wonderful little what-ifs of history. What if the Dutch, let alone the French and the British, what if the Dutch had won Bengal? Because let's remember that in 1759, the British and Dutch actually fought a battle across the Hooghly over the control of Bengal. And the Bengal enterprise, the commercial and political enterprise. And Mir Jafar actually lost his Nawabship because he threw in his lot with the Dutch. at that particular point of time against the British, which he had conspired with, whom he had conspired with against Siraj-ud-Daulah. Imagine how these things play out. But the British won, and Mir Jafar lost his Nawabship. Mir Qasim came on, so on and so forth. So history is a wonderful, wonderful thing. It's a strange and interesting and charming and trying and irritating and joyful thing to me. The waters are what make it joyful for me. It's what makes it interesting. So thank you very much for asking that question, Anaga. Bless you. Preeti Jha asks, how much research did you need to do for your book on the Battle of Plassey? Well, Preeti, I had to do a heck of a lot of research, and I think that is the underpinning of the book. What I found that when I started out thinking about the Battle of Plassey, writing a book about the Battle of Plassey, I immediately realized with everything that had been written that most books on the battle and situations around the battle had hadn't considered multiple sources in the sense that they'd been focusing on Indian sources or sources in Bengali or British colonial sources or modern British sources, primarily in English, but ignored the sources in French or Dutch or books written in Bangladesh, in Bengali and English, books written by in Bangla, in India, in medieval texts, texts of the time, and they essentially focused on a few key books, a few key texts to construct this whole history, a history of convenience. So in order to break through that, I had to actually cut across this barrier, this sort of self-imposed or self-inflicted barrier for whatever reason, vested interest that people would do it with. And whether it's nationalistic interest or colonial interest or post-colonial interest or whatever. And my interest is only to tell the story in the most comprehensive way. So I reached out across the borders, if you will, literally, and these barriers, and sourced books in multiple languages through multiple times by people written who carry multiple different kinds of politics, who come from very different backgrounds and very different times from where they were written, hagiographies or hagiography, if you want to call it that, political histories, memoirs, impressions, epic poetry, in all kinds of things, and a lot of government data preserved by, ironically, the East India Company, which was very, very thorough, and the British government, the Crown government in India. Extremely diligent record keeping. But the irony is that people who've been writing histories have actually not bothered to go deep enough into the records. So I've gone into the same records that many, many people have used before, but just gone way, way deeper and come out with a completely different kind of telling, because you just have to go deeper. And I looked at how Plassey is remembered in the present day. I've seen these other records, company records and literary records and other historical records, and I just put everything that I possibly could together. And that meant traveling to Plassey, traveling to Bengal, to other touch points of history in Bangladesh, for instance, to go to libraries in Kolkata and Delhi, reach out to the British Library, reach out to libraries in America, which are repositories of immense amount of fine manuscripts, reach out to friends who have very good collections, interview people, talk to people who are academicians, get suggestions. I mean, I used every device, including songs about Siraj-ud-Daulah and Plassey that I could get, or remembered history. So you would just have to, for me, to make history living history, I have to approach it in that way. I don't look at history in a static, boring sense of a dusty manuscript, however romantic that may be. But you have to open the damn dusty manuscript and look inside for it to make any sense to you. So it just needs to be any way you can do it. The deeper you go, the wider you look, the more time you're willing to spend on it, the better book of history you will get, or the better book of anything you will get. So as many sources as you absolutely possibly can, as many languages, as many writers, as many cultural and historical and any kind of impulses that you can put together. That's the only way that's the way I work. There's a question from Preeti Jha. Writing can be an emotionally draining and stressful pursuit. Any tips for aspiring writers? Well, Preeti, you've hit the nail on the head. Writing is indeed a stressful and emotionally draining pursuit, or it can be at any rate. I must be then a masochist because I've done it over and over again through 8 books, and I'm working on my 9th and 10th and 11th as we speak. And I've written my entire life. So, but it's something that I like doing. Indeed, I love doing. Writing keeps me going. Writing makes me learn things. Writing makes me travel. Writing has made me interact with people, imbibe knowledge that I might never have come by otherwise. Writing has taught me about how little I knew about so very many things. And it's taught me humility to a great extent. It's also taught me to persevere. It's taught me to be resolute. It's taught me strength beyond anything that I thought that I possessed, because it's a simple formula. I mean, if you want to write and if you want to be read, then you have to persist. So when I speak of strength and fortitude and so on and so forth, it's something as simple and as brutal from time to time as just sort of when you lose your muse, or you don't have the energy to sit and write, or you don't have the mental strength to sit and write because you're tired, or for all kinds of reasons. Could be an intrusion from another situation. It could be that you just simply, your mind is too full and you're too tired, or you can't find fresh words or fresh thoughts to put down. Whatever it is, you give yourself a break, you rethink matters, and you take a nap, go for a walk, read another book, write something else, listen to music, watch a movie if you can, do anything that you need to take your mind off what you need to do, and let it all come back to you in a sort of a tangential way, let it sort of creep up on you. And if you like your craft enough, and if you like what you're doing enough, and if you have enough of an urge to tell the story that you think that you must tell, then the writing will re-emerge. And whether or not other people rave about what you've written, if it's satisfying to you, and if you can write for an audience of 1 or an audience of 100 or 1,000, it's entirely up to you. But it will come back, and you have to persist. Don't stop writing. Warm up. There's a warm-up process in writing as well. If you go cold, keep at it. Sit in front of your computer. Sit with a pen and paper. Sit with your notebook. Go to another location in the house or outside or in a park or in a coffee shop, even though now it is COVID. Whatever it takes, just distract yourself, give yourself a fresh mind, work at it, and it'll come back to you. And it'll make it, may not make it less emotionally challenging or stressful. But I think after you're done telling your story, whether it's nonfiction, historical nonfiction, or any other nonfiction, or fiction, or poetry, or theater, or screenplay, anything that you choose to write, a short story, a novella, a novel, anything really, children's books, illustrated book, anything, it will, I think, will prove very satisfying to you, very cathartic, very educative, and very cleansing, and very sort of a great release. And I suspect that you'll go back to it, even though it may have proved stressful and draining from time to time. So every good wish to you, Preeti, and every good wish to every writer, and every good wish to every reader, because without readers there wouldn't be a writer. There's a question from a person called The Pointless, who goes by the Twitter handle HVela2000. I absolutely love the handle. Anyway, the query is very flattering. I was almost getting convinced that history could only be written the Dalrymple way, and then came you. What took you so long, and who are your inspirations among writers of history? or among historians. Well, thanks very much, and I'm deeply flattered. And I'm glad to be there, whether before Dalrymple or after Dalrymple. I mean, it's sort of BD and AD in this particular case, but I'm just happy to be here. I have been writing for quite a while. I've been a journalist for over 30 years now, and I've been writing books for the past 15. So I have been around a while, and all my books have a very, very heavy dose, if you will, of history. So writing history, I'm a student of history myself, so it's not something new for me. But thank you very much for saying nice things about my latest book on the Battle of Plassey. I'm, the Dalrymple way of writing history is the Dalrymple way, and maybe, there is a Tharoor way, and there is a Pillai way, and there is a Chakravarti way, and there is a Chandra way, and there is a Sharma way, and there is a Guha way, and it's all ways. There are many, many ways. Nobody has in northern India. There's a phrase, there's a word that says theka. So nobody has a theka on the way history is written or the way history is approached. I've been around, but I'm very happy to have written a book of pure history, if you will, and other books contain a lot of history, but they're anthropological books. They're books on conflict and conflict resolution with a very, very strong component of history. But this is entirely about history and its implications. So yes, this would be my first, and I hope definitely not my last. I have a lot to come. So I'd like to tell the story. Maybe it comes from my background as a journalist and as well, that I'd like to tell it in an engaging way, and I'm trying to bring out facts and present things in a way that is not always done. I'm not writing to please anybody. I'm not writing to displease anybody. I'm writing to push myself and hopefully to take the debate to another level, which I tried to do with the Battle of Plassey. I tried to sort of wash the Battle of Plassey in I hope, an entirely new way, which seems to be increasingly acknowledged. So I'm very, very happy with that. So it is not trying to outright anybody. It's not trying to write history for the sake of glamour. It's not writing history for the sake of being invited to literature festivals or to be regarded as this sort of larger than life figure who sort of straddles something, or is a white Mughal or a brown or a black or a yellow Mughal or whatever it is, whatever it may be. It is trying to write a story. History is also a story. Try to write it in an engaging way. Try to write it in a manner with absolute emphasis on research, on background, on digging, on going where others haven't gone, or maybe sticking your neck out and going where others haven't gone before, or maybe not in quite that way, and try and present the view rather than sort of impose, saying that I know best. I don't. I mean, I'm writing history because others have written history before me, and it's their work and these sources and these snippets of manuscript, or these snippets of photographs or paintings or books or treatises or PhD theses or essays or poems or things that have come to us from the past that I'm referring to put my own book together. So one has to be necessarily humble about it as well. And I think that if that is my way, then I'm happy for it to be called the Chakravarti way. But I hope you enjoy it. From your comment, it seems you have. And that energizes me, that gives me great pleasure and fills me with great hope and with tremendous energy. And here's 2 more books on history then, written the Chakravarti way. So thank you very much. Dr. Priyaranjan Mohan has this question, and I think this has to be the question. Among very fine and meaningful questions that I've received, and thoughtful questions. It says, it goes this way: what are the ethics of writing about historical figures? I think that's a wonderful question, and it's ethics about writing about historical figures, and I'll extend it to writing about historical events. I think it is an extremely important question and thought to keep in front of us as we write. as we research history and as we write. And it can't be stressed enough. Now, it is also, when you're talking about what are the ethics about writing about historical figures, it is actually your personal ethic that you're really considering over here. And it is your personal approach. So for me, it is my personal ethic about writing about a historical figure is to try and be as clinical about the historical figure as possible. Yes, one can be worked up about, can be emotional about a particular point in history, but to tell a good history, to tell it in as unbiased a way as possible, in as comprehensive a way as possible, in a way that allows the reader to gauge the event or the people related to a particular event in time and space for what they really were. I think it is incumbent on the writer/researcher. In this case, let's talk about the Battle of Plassey, the book that I have written recently, published recently. It was very, very important for me to look through as many possible sources that I could to get hold of, read through as many histories, biased or unbiased or partially biased, and view it for their own sense of ethics and their own sense of consonance and dissonance to that particular event, like the Battle of Plassey and Siraj-ud-Dowlah and Mir Jafar and Robert Clive, and all the cliches about them, and look beyond the cliches, look beyond the sort of the usually known or portrayed history, and bring that out. So for me, it was not about Mir Jafar being a traitor in the clinical sense. It's not about Siraj was a supremely efficient ruler. He wasn't. I mean, he was a conflicted ruler. It's not about Robert Clive being the Lion of Bengal. He bloody well was not. I mean, he was a nervous wreck who till even halfway through the battle had absolutely no idea he was going to win it. So these are, it's important these to me are ethical issues as well. I mean, you have to approach it in a way that, to as much as possible to sift through the curtains that have been, sort of pulled across events and across people, or the way in a sort of a biased manner or in an unethical manner that the curtains have been drawn. Or opened, and the way presentations are made. So maybe these writers have done it with their sense of ethics, because they had to justify a colonial enterprise, they had to justify a nationalistic enterprise, they had to justify a Hindu enterprise or an Islamic enterprise or whatever enterprise it is. For me, the enterprise is to tell as clinically possible and as entertainingly possible and as in a way, entertaining not in a sensationalistic manner, but entertaining in a manner that it makes it accessible and readable to readers beyond the pale of academia. I need to reach out to a universe of readers that go beyond academia as well. For me, that would be a job well done, or a worthwhile job to be done. So that is also my choice of ethics in terms of writing about historical figures and historical events. And one must look at the grays. You can't just look at historical figures and historical events in black and white, because that, to my mind, however, sort of a moral majoritarian aspect you come from, or sort of an on-high moral high horse you come from, you can't do that. I mean, it's not right. To me, that would be wrong ethics to begin with. So when you look at it in black and white alone, there are so many grays, like with us in our lives. You had grays back then as well. I mean, what led Siraj to do what he did? What led Clive to do what he did? What led Mir Jafar and Mir Qasim and the Dutch and the French and the Mughals to do what they did? These are many, many layers of grays in that. What were the Portuguese all about? What were the Bengal nobility all about? What were the not so noble people all about? I mean, how about the fact that, you had an existing condition or pre-existing condition, to use a medical term, of conspiracy in the Murshidabad court way before the British got into the picture, way before Robert Clive even arrived in Calcutta. So, to Calcutta. So, what about the ethics of presenting that truth, if you will, or those truths? So, ethics is a wonderful thing to play around, but for me, ethics is a very meaningful thing, and it basically means that one has to peel away the layers, look beyond the blacks and whites and also into the multiple shades of grays and multiple shades of white, if you go, multiple shades of black. Color is a wonderful thing, and we must look at all the shades as a painter does, and as a writer, as a researcher, as a historian. It is my ethical duty to look at all those shades as well. So, Dr. Mohan, thank you very much for your question. Cyril Jacob has a question or a comment that you seem to have categorized your books very thoughtfully. Please throw some light on how you do it and the comparison between previous books and the book on Plassey, which is my latest book, and a little comment about the process. Well, thank you very much for asking this question, Cyril. And for me, it's really, it's a process that needs to be done in a very organized way. And of course, every book has its own sense of organization and its own stories, and its own data and its own readership. So it must be approached in a manner that is particular to each book. So I don't have a formula, but except for the formula of researching my subjects thoroughly, whether it's nonfiction or fiction, whether it's history or any other kind of book, political, travelogue, or novella that I'm writing, that I need to be working on. And then when I sift through the information, and you begin with the synopsis, but even with when the book is done, when it's researched and when you're ready to write, you may find that you're going a little off synopsis, or you need to tweak it a little bit. So you need to be adaptable towards that. So when I sit down to write the book, I reorganize it one more time, synopsis downwards, and break it into contents, organize the content, break it into chapters, subheads, so on and so forth. So I know the structure of the book. And then I begin to write the book, and I don't always do it sequentially, because once I know in my mind how I'm going to tell the story, then I can begin. I've begun a book towards the end. I've begun a book at the beginning and carried on till the end. I've begun a book in the middle. I've begun with disparate chapters, and then moved what would be chapter 10, and then gone into writing chapter 8, and then gone to writing chapter 16. You can do it with some books. You can't do it with others. So you need to be flexible with the project that you're doing, the kind of work that you're doing. But organization is absolutely critical. You need to break your book up into bits that is good for telling the story. In The Bengalis, which is my book before my history on the Battle of Plassey, I was actually writing a book on an entire people with thousands of years of history, and it needed to be broken up into the genesis, about where the Bengali people came from, what are the Bengali people about, what is their history, what is their culture, what are the roots of Bengali people in many, many ways, and then go into aspects of Bengali character, goes into aspects of the politics of Bengal, what is created present-day Bengal, what are the myths related to Bengalis, what are the idiosyncrasies of Bengalis, the humor, the food, the dress, the culture, the social, the anthropological aspects, the dark side of the Bengali, and describing the Bengali universe, which includes Bangladesh as well, by the way, and the future of the Bengali people, or what I call Bangla sphere. So it needed to be organized in that particular fashion, and that's how I structured the book, actually, with the genesis, the background, the past, the present, the characteristics, and the future. For the Battle of Plassey, I realized very early on, as I was doing my homework, even before I wrote the synopsis, that there's so much that is not discussed about the Battle of Plassey, or not even known. So the whole premise was to structure the research in that way, and to structure the presentation in that way. So I broke it up into three broad aspects: the background, and the battle, and après Plassey, which what followed after the battle. These are all three very interesting aspects, but oftentimes we just learn about the Battle of Plassey, which took place in June 1757. But very little is known about the leading up to the Battle of Plassey. What exactly were the mechanics, the geopolitical, geo-economic mechanics of it? Who were the people? What were the background? What were the impulses? Nothing of this is really discussed. So the background was extremely important to create that. And then the battle itself. And the build-up to the battle was another aspect which is ignored beyond, oh, okay, Mir Jafar betrayed Siraj-ud-Dawla. I mean, come on, there's a whole story behind that, you know. There's a whole story about Robert Clive himself and his revolution. So the background, the build-up to the battle, and then the battle itself, and then après Plassey, forgive my French. So it needs to be, so to my mind, that was the best way to structure that particular book. But again, Cyril, thank you for asking the question, but the approach will vary from book to book. Each book needs its own treatment. Even if you're writing a collection of poetry, when you're putting it all together, you need to also then pick a certain poem to lead the book and to sequence it correctly, so the mood is correct and the mood is appropriate. So there's a whole mechanics of it, but it does come. It is not insurmountable, and you can do it by yourself, and you can do it with the help of your friends and your readers, and hopefully your editor who will agree to publish your book. So good luck.